Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my pleasure to welcome back an honorary Chicagoan, Batya Ungar, Sargon, who's the opinion editor of Newsweek. Recently just assumed that new post. She was the assistant, the associate, but now she's the opinion editor. Before that, she was the opinion editor of The Forward. She's written in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Newsweek, New York Review of Books. She's an author. You'll see the book right behind her over her shoulder, Bad News. Thank you for its placement. I appreciate that very much. She holds a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. And most importantly, she is one of those Jewish voices out there that is really shaping opinion. So not just the opinion editor, but the opinion former, I believe, in some ways as well. Thank you so much for joining me.
It is such an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much, Rabbi. I admire you so much. My family admires you so much. I think my dad's here. Hi, Papa. He admires you so much. And it's a big honor to me to be here with you. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Well, thank you. And my mother thanks you for all of those comments as well. Let's just jump into the news. You know, every day I get the Newsweek, the summary on my phone. I read it first thing in the morning. In terms of what I'm watching in the United States today, which has tremendous impact on the Jewish community as well, is this tension, this battle that's happening between conservative, liberal, right, left, and not even the most extreme positions, but people seem to be trying to move a little bit back to the center, even with some of the more recent candidates in the Republican Party. How are you reading the shifts and the tides within American society?
So I tend to see the big divide in America not as between left versus right, but really as a class divide that separates out the college educated from the lower middle class, working class, people whose jobs don't involve that college degree. And I just think that we as a society have developed an immense amount of contempt for people whose jobs are actually the jobs that we rely on, the essential jobs we rely on to survive as a society, as individuals. And you really see that in the media, you see it from politicians, and unfortunately, you kind of see it on both sides. There's just a real lack of understanding about how many people are struggling in this country, even hardworking people. There's one person who really understood that, and that was Donald Trump. And he is not a person who has a great, dignified way of expressing himself, but he made working Americans feel seen for the first time in 50 years since the economy sort of started to work against them. And that's his real strength. They don't read his tweets, they don't really, or his truth socials. They look at him as somebody who was representing them as a constituency. And I hear this from so many people. And to the extent that, nobody's really challenging him on that front. And I say that not with any great pleasure. It would be wonderful if the left was putting forward an economic agenda, an economic policy that worked for people at the bottom, but it really isn't. The left and the Democrats have become very affiliated with a college-educated mindset. And I think that's where all of this woke stuff is coming from. So it looks like it's a left thing, right? The trans stuff, the re-racialization of American life, but it's actually not. It's about what I see as this elite's need to trash good middle class values. And so the divide to me is really over that. And so when I look at the Republican side, and the big question is, will anyone be able to peel off these Trump voters? Are they speaking to this part of it? And so when I see somebody like Ron DeSantis come out, I'm like, okay, I'm listening, right? Like, is he going to come out with a robust economic agenda that works for the working class? But what I hear is he's coming out against the wokeness. Now, working class Americans, they don't like that wokeness. That does not speak to them. They have middle class values, but they have extremely pressing economic needs right now. And so to me, there's really still no one else in that lane. And so for me, when somebody like me who sees the divide as being about class more than about politics or ideology, I really think that we're starting to see 2016 all over again.
So who was the last politician who dealt with that, who spoke to middle-class America in the way you're describing Trump speaks?
Well, a lot of them talk a good game, but then they show up and they, like Joe Biden, I think he talks a lot about middle America, working class Americans, but then his policies you see end up hurting them, right? I mean, the way that he's handling the whole situation in Ukraine, raised gas prices, the way he handled the situation at the border. I mean, that is, working class Americans very much see illegal immigrants as competing with them in the marketplace and driving down wages. So he talked a good game, Scranton Joe, Union Joe, but then when it came to a fight with the unions over the railroads, he caved to the corporations. So I think that's another sort of really, it used to be that the left was the anti-corporate, anti-war side, right? And the right was like the pro-corporation, pro-foreign intervention side. But now the American people are the same, right? They sort of like, suspicious of big power, on the side of the little guy, not so sure we should be involved in all of these wars. Who's representing them? There's very, very few people.
But how did it get mixed that the working class
Yeah.
person, you're looking for the working class, and at the very same time, you're presenting views that are also extreme on things that don't seem to be that important or necessary to be so extreme, whether it's bigotry, whether it's language, whether it's the working class person, I would assume would rejoice on a little bit of normalcy and not so much tumult all the time. So how did we get that connection? It looks like if you follow that approach, you also come with all the rest.
It's such a great question. For a long time, I asked myself, would Trump have done better if he was more dignified and more of a mensch, or would he have done worse? If you're a working class person, you're looking at what it takes to take on the elites of both parties, because that's essentially what Trump did. And that's the difference to me between Trump and DeSantis. DeSantis is very comfortable taking on the leftist elites. That's important. I think they're terrible. But he is not so good at taking on the elites on his own side. He has not really made any moves to do so. And so if you're a person who feels totally abandoned, who works 60 hours a week at backbreaking labor and is barely making $50,000 a year and can never afford to buy a home. And, every month the electric company, you have to come up with some arrangement because they're going to shut it off, just really, really undignified life for somebody who works that hard. You're looking at this and you're saying, there's one guy who was able to do something for me. And like the Havamina, right, that he would have gotten further if he was more like the elites who sold them out. I just don't, to them, that doesn't compute at all, right? Like the problem is what was normal was this sort of bipartisan agreement that started with Clinton, Reagan, right? That free trade is great, that immigration is really important, that, Mexico and China should be happy, right? Like that started as a kind of bipartisan normalcy. And so for them, they're in such a desperate state. They like to see it. They need to see a fighter. And so the fact that that we find him so, I find it, the way he expressed himself so unsettling and, so beneath the cupboard of the office, to them, I don't know that it's a selling point. They don't like it either, but it's a sign that he's willing to fight for them. And that's how they see it.
But with the lack of truthfulness, let's put it nicely,
Yeah.
or all the impending indictments and everything else, can you imagine that he'll actually be able to capture the Republican nomination?
I was very wrong about this because for a year I was saying, oh, I'm sure DeSantis is gonna, as soon as he announces, wipe the floor with him. And I was just completely wrong about that. And I started to get a glimmer of it like the night he announced, and I'm sitting there waiting to hear some of these issues that are really important to Trump voters. And there's nothing. It's all fighting woke, fighting woke, fighting woke. And something else that I've noticed is, I'm very curious if you agree with me about this, Rabbi, but I think that we've sort of been misunderstanding a little bit the kind of the woke fight as it's unfolding. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people want us to think that the divide in this country is between like the pro-LGBT left and the anti-gay right. And I don't think that is accurate. The way that I see it is that there's a sort of pro-family, pro-middle class values, pro-stable homes for children, pro-American dream, pro-upward mobility center. And then there is a sort of nihilistic, trans, elitist, leftist view that doesn't believe in the family and doesn't believe in America. And by the way, they hate Israel also, not coincidentally, right? That is the real divide in this country. And I know a lot of very religious, God-fearing people who have gay people in their families. They don't agree with them, but they want them to be treated with respect and dignity. And that is sort of where a lot of the middle is. And they get kind of erased by both sides because the elites in the Republican Party, sometimes their messaging does sound anti-gay. And these people do not feel anti-gay. What they are is against the idea of transitioning children or dangerous materials being introduced to kids or the breakdown of the family or drag queen, this kind of a thing. And that is the real divide. I'm very curious if you agree with me.
I guess part of my problem in all of this is I agree that the center is really what should be holding. And there's a lot of people in the center who are looking for someone. But the both ends, and not just the elitists, but the extremists are people who just turn me off. When a lot of that core value of the American dream and of the opportunity for the working men and all of the challenges that need to be addressed, I agree with as individually. But then when it's being presented by a person who also violates all of my values in terms of dignity and honor and religious value and respect for women, and I can go on on the list. It scares me. It scares me also with the rise of anti-Semitism, which I think has come from both sides. And unfortunately, not enough of the politicians have been willing to stand up to the extreme right, the extreme left, the statements that have come out of the extreme left that are anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, the statements that have come out of the extreme right that are anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, and no one really is taking that centerpiece. And to use the example of former President Trump, he is afraid to call these people out. I tend to believe because he's afraid of losing those votes of the center, where unfortunately that form of bigotry may exist with some. I would hope it's only fringe, but we see how much it's rising. So I don't know. I don't think that we are defined by the extremes. I think we are defined by the middle. And I'm wondering, will we be better off if one of those extreme positions, right or left, Trump or pick whoever you want in the Democratic Party, whether it's president or someone else who might rise up, if one of those will come forward, will it be worse? It's kind of scary.
I totally hear everything you just said. And I think that that's a really important point of view. And I think a lot of that refusal to say, look, this person has done enough for me, so I'm just going to ignore his shortcomings. Like, I think that is what makes you such a leader, because very few people are still doing that at this point. People have chosen sides, and that means they can't, just like you said, they can't criticize their own side anymore. And it's terrible.
So how do we get people away from sides and back to ideas?
Yeah. To me, and I'm sure this comes from, my Shabbos table, my parents' Shabbos table growing up, and the Jewish tradition, the Talmud, and being steeped in this tradition. But I think debate is the way we do it. And, we're talking about the middle, but there are a lot of healthy debates that a functioning democracy should be able to sustain, right? Like, there is no reason we as a society should not be able to sustain a healthy debate on abortion. I mean, it's just insane that the idea that has to be settled, right? But both sides think that, right? And to me, the problem here is that we have lost the ability to hear other people's opinions without becoming extremely angry. And I think the reason for that is because we feel very erased by the conversation. And when people feel erased, they go into, extreme survival mode, which makes them very angry, very upset. And so what we're doing at Newsweek is we just introduced the daily debate, where every morning or evening we have a debate at the top of the homepage on one of the most important issues of the day. And the gambit there is, because it is a debate, you're going to see a viewpoint you don't agree with, but you're also going to see your own. And so you're not going to feel erased. You're going to know that whoever curated this for you and put this together for you respects you and respects your point of view and thinks you belong in the American public square. So to me, that's always been the answer, is not to say we can't debate anymore, not to say we can't have conversations anymore. We all have to agree. No, we're Jews. We believe in debate. It's like so important to who we are. But we have to do it in a way where we remind people that a healthy democracy has to be able to sustain civil discourse, debate, dissent, people sitting side by side who don't agree with each other.
So we've lost that in a lot of ways. Even when you watch the presidential debates, they're not presidential debates, they're yelling matches. How do you, what you're doing in Newsweek is laudatory, but what do you think we as a society needs to do to start allowing that debate? Is it because we're erased or we're threatened? I'm not sure what the reason is, but what could we do to shift it?
I think every person has a huge ability and responsibility to do this in their own life. We're all on social media. Like, we see things that enrage us, that other people think every single day, all the time. And so every single day you can just train yourself to be a better American by saying, look, first stop, notice, I'm enraged. Why am I enraged? I don't know this person, right? I like to say that every time you see a stranger say something on the internet and you feel that level of rage, it feels like road rage, like someone just made $1 million, because this app was designed to make you feel that emotion, to keep you on it so they can mine your data, so they can sell it to a third party, probably a Chinese corporation. So that's how it's work. The apps are working as designed. We have to hack how to circumvent that and how to undermine them. But you can do that. We are all empowered to do that. It takes, it's a real avoida, like that doesn't come easily, because, we're very attached to our opinions. But that's, every time you do that, you're stitching back together the fabric of this frayed society. And I mean, as from Jews, especially, like, there's people in our shuls who disagree with us about lots of stuff, and just having those conversations, being in community with people who we know disagree with us, and learning how to respect them. That's it. I think that's the key.
But tachlis,
yeah.
Your first, beyond having the debate on the daily on the website, what would be your first step if you had a magic wand and you wanted to have the community do something? What would be your first step to bring back that healthiness of debate?
Like within the Jewish community specifically?
We could pick Jewish, we could pick general, whichever one you want to tackle, because both are complicated.
Well, there's an organization called Braver Angels that brings together, they call them Blues and Reds, and they create little groups of people, 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and they just have them meet and become ambassadors and then go out into their regular lives, having participated in these conversations. I think people just having the conversations creates like a level of health. I mean, I know that we, like, in our community, we're like, oh, we have this problem, we have that problem, but like the Frum community is doing so much better than everybody else, that I think, there's really, I something I noticed, again, very curious if you agree with this, like when I was coming up, there was this, the two fears that would cause a kid to like go out or leave the community was, either issues of, boys and girls, or issues of like science. They would like, get invested in science and thus leave. Right. And to me, it seems now like both of those threats have been just demolished by the left's overreach. Like the left is now committed to this trans ideology where there's no real difference between men and women, right? And the scientific method has been destroyed by the response to COVID that was so disastrous and so divorced from real science. And meanwhile, the Frum community was doing contact tracing, right? Just because people know each other, they know where everybody's been. They were very careful. They figured out what worked and what didn't. They figured out very early who was at risk and who wasn't. scientific method, right? So the two things that used to be threats to the frum community have now been totally absorbed by the frum community, and the threat no longer really exists in the outside world. So there's a lot to be proud of, I think. And obviously we see the problems within our own community, but there's a lot that's going right and going well, I think, and that I wish the rest of America could emulate.
Well, I think one of the problems, though, that we still have, which probably is part of the American problem as well, is the sense of one size fits all. We still have very narrow boundaries. If you have to look this way, dress this way, talk this way. In fact, they've gotten more narrow. One of the famous examples is the mode of dress, black and white. And if you look at the pictures of the students of the Chafetz Chaim from Radin, there's this wonderful picture. They're all clean shaven. They have very dapper colored suits with hats to match. And there was more flexibility, or I just heard Rabbi Beryl Wein at an event for Hebrew Theological College's 100th anniversary. He said one of the strengths was that you could have in one yeshiva the Zionists and the anti-Zionists, and they were all teaching Torah together. So one of our threats is that. And in American society also, we're putting people in boxes a lot quicker. You are a this, you're a that, and we have to break those boxes as well. Can you address for a minute why you think there is such a rise in anti-Semitism?
Yeah. So I should start by saying I think a lot of the most extreme forms of anti-Semitism have been a constant, but because they were afflicting frum Jews, nobody talked about them. So the physical violence, I think, I don't know that there has been a real, I mean, obviously we had Tree of Life, we had Poway, right? But aside from that, the physical violence that frum Jews experience in cities in America, I think has been pretty constant, is my sense of it. And so there isn't actually a rise in that so much as a rise in awareness of it. And the other stuff, the vandalism that we're seeing a rise in, I think we're living in a time where there's a lot of mental illness. There's a lot of breakdown of community and structures. And my husband and I were on vacation recently, and we met this Chabad rabbi, and he had told us that his Chabad house had been vandalized by a young girl from the local high school, and a teenager, 16. And so she was put into this program. They asked him, would you be okay with her being put into a program to divert her into some sort of like social work scenario where she could undergo therapy instead of going to prison? And he said, of course. And part of that was she sat down with him, and he said to her, he was like, I'm very curious why you did this. And she said to him, well, everybody, it's just in school, it's known, everybody, it's like you could, you can make fun of Jews. They hate Jews. And he's like, well, would you have written that about gays? I hate gays or whatever, gas the gays. And she was horrified. She was like, no, I would never have done that. Who would ever do that? And so he said to her, I'm so curious. Why do you hate us? And she burst into tears and said, I don't know. And I think that kind of, anti-Semitism is really much more closely correlated with bullying than it is with a kind of ideological commitment to being anti-Jewish. So of course, on the far right and on the far left, there's sort of deep levels of anti-Semitism, but the things that we're seeing more of, I think are more pedestrian. I don't mean to underplay it. I mean, every person who experiences this is horrific. But I think it has a lot more to do with the kind of social pressures that are happening right now than it does with a kind of deep-seated ideological opposition to Jews.
But the social pressures, that's an answer, by the way, and that's been the answer for a lot of anti-Semitism throughout the centuries. When you need somebody to blame, you pick the Jews. So it could be not only is there a rise in documented events, but there could be, because of all of these social pressures that are rising, we're seeing the thing that we always were scared of. Because in America, post-World War II, anti-Semitism was not considered to be acceptable. And now people have forgotten all of that. And so we're scapegoating again, just as other races and other cultures have been scapegoated, but it's a tremendous rise in that. And it's scary. And it's and part of it, to go back to the other article, the other discussion we had, do you think the center in America gets the Jews?
I maybe have a romanticized view of this, but I think that we are so different from Europe. I mean, just so unbelievably different. We don't have that history. The American working class tends to be more Christian. They're very philo-Semitic. Most Christians here are not Catholics, who sometimes can be sketchy, but evangelicals, Protestants.
I'm not suggesting that we're in
yeah.
Europe. I'm not suggesting we're.
No, I know. Yeah. I
People
do think, like, for example, when and this is one of my most controversial takes, but when Marjorie Taylor Greene says that the Rothschilds have space lasers in outer space, she really didn't know that the Rothschilds were Jews. I mean, that's kind of what we're dealing with here. She feels that the elites have stolen the future of her constituents. There's a level at which that is correct, and she knows that there's this banker family, but there's just that association of bankers and Jews for regular, like, uneducated Americans. I just don't think it's there. And so, to me, the center, it really is not anti-Semitic in any way. There's a lot of talk where people are sort of, there was this great moment when Jonathan Greenblatt went on The Breakfast Club, which is a very popular Black radio show. And Charlemagne, who's the host, he said to him, like, Besihat mimut, he said to him, just give me the list. I know I don't hate Jews, but sometimes I see someone get canceled for saying something that I think might be true. Just give me the list of things I can't say so I don't make the mistake. And I think that there's a lot of that. I've been told that by people, like, just give me the list. I don't want to offend the Jews. I love the Jews. But sometimes I think maybe there are a lot of this. There are a lot in this industry. And I think that that's sort of much more what we're dealing with is, just not people who want to offend, but there's, we for good reason, we can get offended by offensive things.
You still think that the core American working class identify with what we used to call the Judeo-Christian ethic? For everything I read and everything I hear is that people are moving away from organized religion. Those ethics that we once had seem to be disappearing.
I don't know that I would call it like Judeo-Christian, because to me, we're about the law, and so there's really very little in that unites me with a sort of a Christian person, except sort of the idea that you're answerable to a higher power, and that you have a responsibility to treat every person with dignity because we're all created in Hashem's image. I think the legal system is probably much more similar to Muslims. And I think, I know, like, the Aguda, for example, works very closely with Muslim imams on issues of religious liberty and stuff like that. People are falling away from organized religion, and it is devastating because it immediately creates a hole, a spiritual hole, an emotional hole, psychological hole, and an economic hole. They don't get access to the kinds of social capital that you get from being in a community. So it's really terrible and very sad. But I don't know that I would say people are like less invested in, again, I think the middle is still very committed to the family, to middle class values, if you want to call it like the Protestant ethic of working hard and fairness. Americans are really, really committed to the idea of fairness, which is coming back to the trans issue. They don't want to see a man competing against women. It just feels unfair. So a lot of it is that innate American sensibility that I think is very close to being, as Jews, it's very natural, but I don't know that it's necessarily Christian or Judeo-Christian.
I would challenge you on that last piece about fair. If you think about it, in Hebrew, there's no word for fair except zelo fair. They use there are certain terms that we accept as natural. It's the same thing I spoke this past Shabbos about. In fact, we don't have a word in Hebrew for fun. We don't have fun. We have simcha. We can relax. We can waste time. But the only two words that we use in Hebrew for fun is either kef, which is Arabic, or the word fun. Okay, that's fun. So there are certain values that are out there that I'm not sure we always agree with. Fairness, I'm not sure I would use without any political undertones a sense of equality and equity at times. But it's a real challenge, and you have it, and believe it or not, Batya, I have to apologize, but our time's up. This has gone by so quickly. We have solved all the problems of the world, thank God, in the last 30 minutes. And I look forward to continuing to read what you write and to watch what you're fashioning at Newsweek. It is really exceptional. And as you did the last time you were in Chicago, I look forward to seeing you at Kins as well. So
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
very much for all of your contributions. I'm sure people aren't going to agree with everything you said or I said. That's what makes all of this so much fun. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Bye.
Bye.